The box season is over. It's our last one, last talking. But there's first a little bit of news before we get to some fun stuff. With me, as always, here is Nick Mallet and Gavin Rich. Guys, welcome. Today was the World Cup draw. And initially thought was, well, it's not a bad draw for the box to have Italy, Georgia, and Romania. Get some momentum going in that pool. Until I saw who the quarterfinal opponent is going to be. And it's going to be the All Blacks and France potentially in the semi-final. So it doesn't quite get that great, but I suppose this Bok team, Nick, won't really fear anybody at the moment, given their tour to Europe and their form in the Rugby Championship.
Yeah, it is a strange situation where we're sitting where the number one team in the world now. It's okay. It's just still what 18 months to 2 years out, but that the number one team will play the number two team. In the world rankings in the quarterfinal of this next World Cup. I just don't see how that could possibly happen. But I presume, because of this, you can draw and get anyone out of the second group and the third group and the fourth group. I mean, we've got teams that, I'm just so pleased that we scrum well, because Italy, you got Italy, well, they're quite a rugby playing team. And then you got Georgia, who's a very strong physical scrummaging team. And I imagine Romania, if they've got, any strength, it'll be around their pack. So we've got a good pool, but it looks like that quarterfinal is going to be a real cracker. It's going to be well, quite frankly, the last World Cup, the four semi-finalists should have been South Africa, New Zealand, France, and Ireland. And because of the pool, England and Argentina were allowed to sneak up into the semi-finals through a much easier draw. So I suppose the Boks have been used to it, and I'm sure at the moment they're confident of beating anyone anywhere.
Gav, I suppose I was going to say who'd be the happiest team around in this draw, but I suppose it's anybody on the other side of the draw, because Ireland are licking their lips. They feel I saw a piece out saying Ireland's best chance of making a final already. England obviously are the form team, but I mean Argentina are probably the dark horses on that side of the pool as well.
And well, look, Argentina actually have a good record at World Cups if you think about it. They've made the semi-finals a few times, often in tournaments where the door's been sort of opened for them by somebody else winning. Now, 2007 springs to mind when I was in Marseille watching Australia lose to England, remembering that Australia were a good team in those days. Australia lost to England in Marseille, and on that same night in the quarterfinals, it was New Zealand who went down to France, and suddenly it opened the way for South Africa, but also for Argentina, and they went quite deep in that World Cup. I just don't understand why. I mean, if you're going to have a seeding system, how you can actually have number one in the world against number two in the world in the quarterfinal. Surely you should put them in two separate sides of the draw. And another question, Brendan. Do you know the seedings yet of the FIFA World Cup?
No, I don't at all.
And you won't, because it hasn't happened yet. And when is the FIFA World Cup happening? The FIFA World Cup's happening next July. Yeah. A whole year and a bit before the Rugby World Cup. So if they can do their draw so late, why do rugby has to do their draw so early? I read your report on supersport.com earlier, and you were talking about England look like, they could actually soon become the number two team in the world. But we actually don't know that because it's 2 years away. I think we can be quite sure that South Africa will probably hold on to the number one spot until then. But England, I'm not so sure. Although I rate England, that I rate England. I just think that France, when they get Antoine Dupont back and they develop it a bit more, France might be the number two team in the world then, or the All Blacks could recover and so on. So it's actually, to me, it's a bit bizarre that we sort of going on rankings 2 years ahead of the tournament. It's when it can obviously be done a lot closer to the tournament, because that's what they're doing in the round ball game. So that's the one thing. I just don't actually understand how the seedings work. I mean, why we have seedings if you're going to have number one playing number two in the quarterfinals, and why it can't be done later on in the build up to the World Cup.
Yeah, because it is a very lopsided pool. I mean, if France are going to be number two by that stage, like you say, then the top three sides are probably on the one side of the pool, and then everybody else is the other one. I suppose
one thing I would like to say, sorry about that, is that South Africa's policy of rotating selections, like Russie's, let's be honest, it's Russie's policy of rotating selections and building up to almost like having like 45 guys who can play international rugby. Maybe we see the validity of it now, because if we are going to play New Zealand in a quarterfinal and then play France in the semi-final, and we win those games, you would sort of expect the South Africans to be completely knackered by the time they reach the final, if they get that far. But with the way we've developed our depth, we may be the one nation who might be able to deal with that kind of scheduling. I think Russie's already said that maybe he made a mistake last time by going in with the same team against England in the semi-final as in the quarterfinal, so against France. So we've got a similar sort of tough draw this time. So we actually go. I'm assuming that France don't. You can actually manipulate the draw. I mean, if you think about it, if New Zealand want to avoid us, they just make sure they lose to Australia in that first game. But and those sort of things do happen at the World Cup. I don't say that gets manipulated, but there's always a shock or two at the World Cup. And although I don't rate Australia that highly, who says that they're not going to be on top of their game in a year or two times? Because in year or two's time, because they do have they probably bring some of the overseas players back, and we know Wilk Skelton, for instance, makes a huge difference. And there's always a league player hanging around somewhere in the sort of Australian rugby firmament that can be brought in to make them extra potent. So yeah, it's if any team's going to have a really tough draw, I would say that New Zealand might be in trouble, because maybe they don't have quite the same depth as us. So if they, the way I read it then is if they beat us in the quarterfinal, they then have to play France, and then they have to play whoever they meet in the final. That's going to be very difficult. I think the one team that can actually take that route is South Africa, because of Russie's selection policy.
Yeah, I was going to say, Nick. I was going to mention that I rather flippantly said in a WhatsApp message earlier that I suppose the one good thing about it is that Scott Robertson might be out of a job, and it's got to end at some point, and we might put him out of a job if that's the case. And maybe it's being a bit flippant, but he's under a lot more pressure, and I think he's probably the one coach who probably thought this was a bit of a nightmare scenario for him.
Well, it's any international coach that coaches South Africa, France, England, I presume Ireland now, and South Africa. Probably less so Australia, because of the three rugby, three different rugby games they play over there. But it's very, very stressful. So I actually feel for any head coach when he's going through a rough patch. It's very unpleasant, and it takes a lot to turn it around. So you've always got to have a better option. And I know people were sort of strongly saying that maybe they should try and get Tony Brown back from us, as an assistant to Jamie Joseph, and get that combination doing New Zealand. But I'm not sure. I think probably Tony Brown signed up until the next World Cup with us. So it's not an easy situation for New Zealand to be in, and you always have to have a better candidate. It's no good firing the guy you've got and not having a better candidate, one that you know is going to make a dramatic improvement. So New Zealand are always going to be there or thereabouts. I can guarantee you that. Just their rugby culture, their history of World Cups, they'll learn a lot anyway, and so will we next year in the Greatest Rivalry Tour. So I think they're going to be pretty well prepared in 2027, and but to have three of the top four in one side of the draw, as you've said, I think that's it's clumsy by the World Rugby body, and I don't really understand. As Gavin's already said, surely you make sure that 1 and 3 are on one side and 2 and 4 on the other, and then you work your way after that. But going with 6 and then drawing, so you could actually, and then drawing again in the third, instead of making it 1, 2, 3, 4. And I know they've got to do they're wanting to have six pools, is it, with only 4 in each pool. But even so, logically you can still, I would imagine you can still separate the 1 and 3 from the 2 and 4 if you just get someone who's better at math than I am to do it properly.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because I agree with both of you guys, because it would have been easier just to put 1 to 6 on the world rankings in pool A, B, C, D like that, and then draw the rest. because and then you could make sure those seeds were out. But yeah, that doesn't make any sense there. Gav, the last one I want to just ask about New Zealand is I sort of there's the old cliche to be sort of the top side in the world. You have to have sort of 8 to 10 guys who could walk into a world 15. They're not quite there yet, but they've probably got about 5 or 6 at the moment. They probably developed another 3 or 4 in the next 18 months. So they could be quite a threat to the BOKS by the time we get to that game. If we get to that game.
Okay, I'll go back to 1999. The Springboks were playing against the BOKS at Loftus. I don't know why this suddenly came into my head. And Nick actually was the coach. And at the time, the BOKS, it was before the World Cup. You guys rectified when you got to the World Cup, but it was before the World Cup, and you played at Loftus, and nobody was really giving the BOKS a chance. I think it was in your time, Nick. I think it was 99. But anyway, I was in the lift at that hotel in Pretoria, and I ended up sharing the lift with some of the All Black coaches. And we were coming down, and at that time, it actually might have been later on, because I think
it was the Rugby Championship or whatever it was called back then. And we played, because we had the World Cup in the same year as we still kept on with the Rugby Championship. So
okay, so they'd actually beaten you 28-0 in Dunedin in the first game.
Yes.
So they saw themselves as favourites, and you were going through quite a few problems at that particular time. You had injuries and all that. And I remember standing in the lift with the All Black coaches, and I remember sort of saying, like, and they all looked incredibly nervous. And I said, what's wrong, guys? And they said, it's still the BOKS. Those were the words. And they would have said, it should actually have applied more to Rudolf Strauli's time later on, because you actually had a really good record against the All Blacks. But some of the other coaches didn't. And I'm sure that they had that same attitude. It's still the BOKS. The All Blacks are still the All Blacks. Yeah. And Nick, you've been there, so you can sort of like talk more sort of informedly of this. But if I was an international coach, the game that I would be the most nervous about is actually the quarterfinal of a World Cup. You don't want to play a top team, because if you go to quarterfinal stage, you've really bombed in the World Cup. Exactly. And in fact, a little point of fact here is that South Africa have never actually won a quarterfinal in an Australasian World Cup. In 2003. And 2011, both times there was a narrative. In 2003, we had a coach who basically shot himself in the foot and shot his players in the foot. Quite frankly, was Strollrod and all that nonsense. And then in 2011, Bryce Lawrence's refereeing performance is one of the worst refereeing performances I've ever seen. So there were sort of stories to both of those, but it is a fact that we've never actually won a quarterfinal in Australasia. So I'm actually, to be honest with you, I don't want to be nervous for 2 years. We're a long way from the World Cup, but I'm a little bit tense at the idea of playing against the All Blacks in a quarterfinal.
Yeah, but as you said, Gavin and Brendan, I don't think we must take it as a fait accompli that it's going to be New Zealand. It's amazing what we did in the 1995 World Cup. We were certainly underdogs when we beat Australia in that opening game at Newlands, and you can come out firing. That the home team can just get it right, and they beat. They've had a terrible tour, but they beat the British Lions, and they were very unlucky in that second test not to win that one as well. So, when they really have everything that they at their disposal, all their best players, and if New Zealand doesn't make decent strides in the next, we're looking a long way ahead from a rugby point of view. Honestly, next week is what you think about as a rugby coach, but when we're looking ahead at a World Cup, I still think that Australia playing at home, that's a big game for New Zealand, the opening game, and if they want to avoid us, it wouldn't be such a bad thing for them to lose. But then again, we'd have to play Australia, wouldn't we? And that's the home country, and that could be quite tough for us as well. So whichever way it's going to be difficult.
I'm just glad Gavin didn't go back to that horrible day of Bryce Lawrence there, because I didn't take that loss very well, as Gavin will tell you. No. I told him, let's get out of Dodge.
You're still a bit deep, Brendan. You've never recovered. No,
I was.
Just to tell you, Nick, I had to share a car with Brendan. We drove from Wellington to Auckland the next day. I think we stopped in Rotorua on the way. Yeah. I've never seen such a miserable bloody person in my car. He was like, I don't know if you know this, but he has Basset hounds. He's got his dogs are Bassets. He looked like a Basset sitting there with those two guys.
Yeah, I didn't take that loss very well, I must admit.
Yeah. His words after the game were, "Let's get the hell out of Dodge City." You wanted to leave that night. You didn't want to even stay in the hotel.
That's why I'm just hoping this time around it's a bit better if whoever we face in the quarterfinals. So
Yeah.
that's
Listen, there's an interesting side to that. It was 2003, no, it's 2011 I'm talking about now. Was that Rusty was an advisor, if I'm not mistaken, to Peter, and he was sort of, I suppose, a bit on the outskirts, quite young, not involved with the proper full coaching group. But he definitely, I know that he went to the players and he said to them, listen, have you got a drop goal strategy, guys? You might need one in this. And the players felt they were going to smash Australia and they didn't need one. So, had we had a drop goal strategy in that game, we'd have taken the ref out of the equation because we spent over 25 minutes in their 22 in that second half. Yeah. We just couldn't get across the line because they were playing the ball on the ground, off their feet, coming in from the side, and the guy would not give a penalty. So if you can't take the ref out of the game by playing better, then you've got to have the drop goal as an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, no, definitely. We're not going to touch much on Eben Etzebeth, just to note that it's been postponed, looks like, till Sunday, which I don't think is a very good sign for Eben, probably, that they're deliberating.
Well, I mean, it's quite worrying that the disciplinary hearing, there must have been so many divergent opinions for it to be put off, that they couldn't decide in 4 hours, 7 until, or even 5 hours, so 7 until 12 o'clock or whatever they did. And that there's such a difference in opinion as to how many games he should get if he has been found guilty, which I presume he has. So this is another example of the inconsistencies that we have. If the guys who are in the disciplinary hearing can't, and having got all the facts at their disposal, if they can't decide, it's either 8 games or 15 games or whatever, then how do we understand why, why players are getting red cards, like a Loot, for example, or certainly like Mostert?
Yeah, well, we will wait and see what happens there. We thought we'd do something a bit more fun, do the season wrap there, and we thought we wouldn't do the normal sort of season wrap and go through that. Maybe, guys, let's start maybe with just your highlight of the year for me, or your game of the year. For me, it has to be Wellington, just the fact that nobody's ever beaten the All Blacks like that in New Zealand, and just given the way we discussed it also before the game, and how worried we were of the young guys coming in, and we obviously didn't need to be because they just smashed them in that second half. Nick, you can go first.
No. You could think, I would say, I know that Gavin last week mentioned the 3, but I think, Ireland, France, and New Zealand away, that Wellington game it's probably the best rugby we've played in 40 minutes. That second half was absolutely sensational, and they just did not have a single shot to fire against us. Whereas the other 2 were sort of resilient, gutsy, character-filled games where we were down to 14 and we had to, well, not in the Ireland game, but certainly in the France game. And in the Ireland game, we had a very strong Irish side against us. So those would be the 3 games that I'd look at. But just in terms of where this team can go, if they decide if we do get on the front foot and our pack dominates and sashes and our backlines, taking it to the line and creating all these opportunities, I think we're unstoppable when we play like that. Absolutely unstoppable.
Yeah.
I'm sort of, I'm not gonna wear a Springbok hat now. I'm gonna wear a rugby hat, and actually probably irritate a lot of people and say that, to me, actually not the Springbok performance of the year, because I think you've already said it. It was Wellington, and probably the game in France where they won with 14 men in the end. But the game of rugby, if you want to advertise rugby as a sport, was probably Ellis Park. I mean, that freaky game where you had all those points in the first half scored by the Springboks, and then the underdogs came back and scored 38 unanswered points. I mean, that was the rugby freak show of the year, and I know it was very uncomfortable for us as South Africans. But if you were a neutral watching rugby and you wanted to get drawn into to rugby as a sport, I think that would be the game that somebody would show you. And actually, funnily enough, that window, that first, which I've said many times before, that 20 minutes windows at the start of the second half, of the first half, when we went up 21-3 or whatever it was, 21-5 or whatever it was, 22-5, I think it was. That window actually was a throw forward to what was going to come later on. because then we saw it like later in games. One of the most enjoyable performances, one of the most enjoyable 40 minutes I had watching rugby this year was the second half in Durban. Just because of the skill level of the Boks, and that, remember when they just started putting it together, Arceus Neyman his little offloads, and even Wilco Low was coming through and carrying the ball and taking these little snap passes. I mean, that was fantastic as well. So actually, the fact that we've got so many things to talk about is just an indication of how good the Boks have been this year, and actually how good, despite the red cards and everything, how good rugby's been this year. That game in France, that game in Paris a couple of weeks ago was played at 100 miles an hour as well. And I mean, and we saw that sort of a shift in momentum. So also for a neutral observer, that despite the red card, that would be a game that many people would see us down. Although I think there was quite a lot of wrestling in that game, which the neutral doesn't like. But when I say arm wrestling, there was that long period in the second half. We were camping in their half, and France were defending, and I sort of knew that the Boks were getting the upper hand then because they were getting physically on top of them. But I think a lot of neutrals probably didn't enjoy that. But yeah, Ellis Park, definitely the game of the year.
I'm gonna throw a bit of a curveball in here. I take an individual performance of the year probably would be Sasha in Durban, for most of us anyway. But let me ask it a different way. You can answer that one if you want. But overseas performance of the, or should I say foreign player performance of the year, to me it would probably either come down between Biel Beeri in Six Nations or Ardie Savea, who saved the All Blacks a number of times when they were under pressure this year. I don't know, Nick, mate, what do you think? Who would you think otherwise?
Yeah. We can debate the other teams, but I think if we stick on the Boks, which I wanted to do, I think the personal sort of attitude that we had going into that Ireland game, how it was so personal to Rassie, and it was obviously personal to the Boks when we played Ireland. There was no love lost there at all, and it was a very, very, very difficult stadium to play in, and the way in which we conducted ourselves there, I mean, it was extraordinary. I mean, just to see the pleasure on our faces, each guy who scored a try. And it's unusual to see, like Damien looking at the crowd and banging his chest, and then Sasha doing it, and it was just, they were just absolutely up for that game like I haven't seen for a very long time. So that for me would be, as opposed to an individual, the individual one would be Sasha's performance in the game against Argentina. But in terms of a collective will to win, it's a collective decision that there's no backward step for us today. We are going to beat up this Ireland side, and whatever it takes, whether it takes 16 scrums and 8 times that we don't go for poles, whatever the stats were, that was the attitude that the team had there. We're not getting off this field unless we've won this game.
Yeah.
Brendan, I'd also rather talk about the Boks, but seeing you, I did ask about overseas players. Obviously, to me, Ardie Savea defending the fortress with that last turnover late in that game in Auckland. I mean, that was South Africa. We were about to go through that frontier. I think we probably would have ended up we were 7 behind, weren't we? So we could only draw the game. But Ardie Savea was magnificent in that second half. And I'm trying to think. I don't have very strong, because obviously the big rugby, if you're going away from the Boks, the big rugby event of the year was obviously the Lions Tour, and I can't really remember any standouts there. I mean, it was. I sort of, some of those games I watched after they'd been played and everything. So I would go with Ardie Savea.
Yeah.
From a Springbok point of view, obviously Sasha in Durban. But what I really enjoyed too was the emergence of some of the youngsters that are coming through that beyond Sasha, in particular Ethan Hooker in Wellington. Remember he had that run from deep in his own half where he had the confidence to run there's him, Kanan Moody had the odd sort of like hiccup during the season, but generally he was really, really good. I just thought that the youngsters come. We do have youngsters that are coming through to challenge the older guys now, and we don't have to sort of feel that we've got to go with a certain band of players. And I think that's important because you just don't know, even like somebody like Peter Steff is brilliant at the moment, but in 2 years' time, it's you go over that hill very suddenly, and you can't really predict when it's going to happen. I personally think that Irvin might be sort of heading on that little sort of downward slope at the moment, and if he does get a long time off, from a personal point of view, it might actually be good for him. But it is good that there's this young band of players coming through. You look at the forwards in particular, and you look at Jan-Hendrik Wessels, you look at Ruan Nortje, and those guys that have come through and have replaced the sort of band of brothers who won 2 World Cups in a row.
Yeah, no, we're getting onto those. We're going to start talking about individuals and looking ahead as well. I was going to say the one guy I would add to that list as well, you talk about players that stood out, is not the youngster, is Kobus Reinach, who I think we started this year as Grant Williams as the top scrum half, and we all sort of in agreement. But he's certainly this season, sort of at his ripe age, has had a vintage year as well.
Yeah. On that, Brendan, I actually, I'm not sure when. I think maybe I'm different. Maybe I'm ahead of the game. I don't know. I just sort of sometimes think that we don't necessarily look at the guy who comes on later in the game as the first choice. Sometimes the guy who comes on is actually maybe seen as the best scrum half or hooker. I mean, for a long time, Malcolm Marx was coming on behind Bongi. And obviously, because Bongi had the scrumming and all that, but Malcolm, it's not like Malcolm was weak at that either. So we had like a definite finisher there. So and when Stephen Kitsoff in Japan in 2019 was coming on, and then funnily enough at the last World Cup when Oxen Chair was coming on for Stephen, like it was the other way around, you couldn't really sort of say, well, this is the number one, and that's the backup, and I do think that with the scrum halves, I do think that if I were to look at the scrum halves, and obviously because of his age, he's still got time on his side. I would actually say that Grant Williams is our special scrum half within the squad at the moment. I think Hashim Pete might be coming in the next 2 years as well, though.
Yeah. No. Well, okay. Let's have a look. Maybe I in our chat beforehand, I called them losers, which is probably a bit harsh and not the right word. And Gavin wrapped me over the fingers for it. But Nick, just obviously some players are going to fall by the wayside. We used 50 players this year anyway. I think you can only take 33 or 34 players to the World Cup anyway. So there will be players there. Who are the players do you think that need a big URC or big international season in the next 18 months?
Yeah, I think guys who they've had other players go past them. I mean, the most obvious is Handré Pollard, who has been with the squad all the way through. But at the end of the tour, he was. I'm not sure whether it was an injury or not, but I know that Rassie went in there with Sasha and with Bonnie as off the bench. So I think he needs a really good season with the Bulls. He's definitely not going to go anywhere. 31 years old, he's going to be around. But he needs to prove that he can really make a big difference. I think Faf has dropped down quite a long way. He was a guy who was in the mix, and then suddenly it was Reinach. It's not an age thing because Reinach's probably older than Faf, but we've got him, and we've also got Morne van der Berg, who I thought did really well when he played, when he had his opportunities, and then obviously Grant Williams. So those three seem to have gone ahead of Faf. So those two, and then I thought of a strange one, but it's actually Jan-Hendrik Wessels, who missed out on this tour with his ban. I think he's still going to be in the mind of the players, but he had a real opportunity, I think, on this tour to establish himself as the sort of the sort of number two, if you like, to Malcolm Marx. I know we never say there's a number one and number two, but Malcolm Marx was the player of the year, rugby player of the year. So I think Hendrik Wessels, Grobelaar came in and did a really good job. So he's just, he's treading water now. Is he going to go back to loose head prop? Is he going to go? I think that he needs also to really, when he gets back, to define himself as a rugby player and where he's going to fit in with. He's such a talented player. But I think he was, at the end of the year, a guy who I must have been really disappointed not to have been on that tour.
Yep.
Well, Brendan, Nick's mentioned most of the names that I would have mentioned, and I don't know if you did mention Vincent Koch, but I would have obviously put him there as well. Obviously, Wade, age, Father Time waited for no man and all that, and so then you also have to include Bongi in that list, but. There's a couple of other guys who were sort of became forgotten this year. One of them obviously being Jaden, the scrum half at the Sharks. He's sort of disappeared off the radar entirely at the moment. I know Rassie wanted to play him at some point, and then he couldn't because something had come up, and I think that the loss to Australia made him change his plans. And it really disappoints me that the Sharks are playing George Whitehead at fly half at the moment. I mean, I don't know if that's going to continue. Like bringing in a journeyman from Greek was when you've got Jordan Hendrickse. Okay, I mean, I wasn't that impressed with Jordan at the latter part of last season, but apparently he was struggling with a bit of a groin injury. But you know, we're happy at the moment because we've got 3 fly halves. We've actually got 4 because we know that Damien Willemse can probably play there as well. Yeah. So we've got 4 fly halves, but we probably would like, because we know what can happen. I mean, you could have two fly halves injured at the next World Cup. I would really like to see Jordan Hendrickse pick up in the coming months in the Champions Cup and in the URC and become a good game driver for the Sharks. And if he does that, then the Sharks' form will actually improve. The attacking game will improve because at the moment they're sort of all over the place. So that's what I would really like to see is actually Jordan Hendrickse backed to be their game driver, be their fly half. I know they think they've got a problem at fullback because Fussie's injured, but if they were prepared to back Hakeem Kaneni to come off the bench the other night in Connacht, then going forward, they should be able to back him to be the starting fullback as well. And he is a kid with a bright future. So that's what I would like to see. I mean, I could actually otherwise sit here for the whole summer and go through other players. I mean, Ben Jason Dixon never got to play a lot this year. We always talk about like who's going to take over from Peter Steph du Toit after the next World Cup. So I'd love to see Ben Jason Dixon really have a good a super rugby, a good URC season as well. Guys like that.
Yeah, I'll add a couple of names to that. I think somebody who, well, I'm not sure if a big season is going to help him would be Evan Roos, but 2 players I think need a good season and an injury-free season. And this is not because I've been in Pretoria a lot of the time, but it's Elric Lowe and Cameron Honeycomb. Hopefully an injury-free season for them. That obviously Russie gets to choose the best out of all those guys that he can. Ben Jason Dixon, another one. Last one, we've got about 5 minutes left. Let's go into a Christmas wish list. Nick, I know you're going to be Santa and you're going to have a Christmas wish list, yeah?
No, so I read that the Six Nations are going to propose to have a law that you don't get a yellow card for a scrum offence. So you can get penalised still, but you can't get sent off for being weaker than the opposition. And I'm just wondering if this isn't the start of moving in the direction of depowering the scrum, which I really hope won't happen, because it is something that's really been incredibly evident in our performances this year against the top teams, not just against when I say lower teams, I mean from 5 to 10. I'm talking about the top sides like France and like New Zealand, Australia, and Ireland, and we've it's a very, very powerful weapon that we have. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And my wish is obviously that the scrum is not debarred and that we can go into that World Cup with what I consider to be the 3 best front rows in the whole world. The only front row that can give Oxenshire a tough ride is our second, if you call them second, but our next level of front row. So Wilco Lowe or Nietling Fouché or those 2 guys, or maybe Thomas du Toit. Those 3 as tight heads will give Oxford a hard time. But I can't see any other tight head in the world giving him a hard time. So the scrum is a vital part of our weaponry.
Yeah, Brendan, when you said earlier today that you're going to do this and do the Christmas thing, and I think I behaved like Scrooge, and I was going to say to you, you don't ask Scrooge to come on your show and ask for a Christmas list. But whilst Nick was talking, I actually did think of one. The best Christmas present that the Springboks can get this year, and actually South Africa as a whole, which they won't get because these people will just never do it, would actually be a global season. If on Christmas Eve somebody came through and said we're going to have a global season from now on, then that would be the best present I think we could ever have. I think for everybody who works for rugby in South Africa, actually, just the whole thing of not knowing whether you're going to be playing rugby at Christmas, and if there were Springbok players who don't want to play the URC, I would completely understand. I mean, we agreed on Sunday, like the owners need to have those guys playing because they're paying them a lot of money. But I would completely understand if there's guys who just want to get off the treadmill. I know they get time off in February and March, but it's not the same thing when you're in season and your team's playing and you're still sort of mentally connected to your team that might be dropping points, and you watch the games because you want to watch. You don't switch off completely. I think that it would just be great if we could have a situation where everywhere in World Rugby there was a time of year when there was no rugby. It would actually be great to have a weekend where we didn't have rugby on TV in this country, because there isn't one, I don't think. I think we have rugby just about every weekend. We all love rugby, but I think at some stage a global season is where we should go. And I think the Springbok players in particular would benefit from that. And that would be my Christmas present for them.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you guys there. I fear though, Nick, on your one, that heading into a World Cup in Australia, where league is so dominant in that, and they're trying to make it more accessible, that we might see more of that happening going there. But my last contribution here, my wish would be that rugby simplifies its laws, that fans can understand it, that we don't sit like this whole November where we debate stuff for hours and people don't understand it and the refs don't understand it. So it's not going to happen, but we can wish for it anyway. So yeah, yeah. We've got about a minute and a half. Last thoughts from everybody. Nick?
I've just really enjoyed it. Thanks very much for a fun year, a fun time talking about the BOKS. And I mean, we've done it from so many different locations, and from the bush, from the seaside, from at home, in France and Italy. No, it's been wonderful. I'm at the moment, of course, in France, so it's been great fun, and I've always looked forward to having a chat with you guys. So thanks very much for inviting me on your show.
Yeah, no, cool. Gav, you got about 30 seconds.
Yeah, no, it's been good fun, and despite what I said just now, I am looking forward to URC. I am looking forward to seeing the youngsters coming through and all that. And it's been a pleasure working with you guys as well.
Yeah.
And happy Christmas.
Yeah. Merry Christmas to everybody watching this. And guys, please, we'll be back for the next Springbok games. Keep an eye on the channel as well. But yeah, for everybody, have a great Christmas and a festive and a peaceful time with family. And that's about it. We'll say goodbye. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers, Brendan. Cheers, Gav.
Stay safe.